Okay. So,
Yeah.
what I tell people is be careful what you're solving. They were solving the problem of efficiency there. I take $1. What can $1 give me? At different economy, dollar can give me different things. So, okay, I'll take the $1, go to the economy where dollar will give me the most. It was that of efficiency. They were solving it so that they could make more returns for businesses. It also meant that I could see my world as my playing field. So I could make product and sell to anybody.
To the entire world,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, so it was making trade, it was growing trade, it was boosting GDP. Because you remember, up until date, if GDP is the only measure of prosperity,
I agree.
then your bucket top, for as long as they are making huge returns and creating huge value, you'll be okay.
They are doing okay.
You're doing okay.
I agree with you because I remember this was one of the challenges we had during our courses when we were doing the MBA. I remember people discussing about HDI and using HDI as the main measure, Human Development Index, rather than using GDP.
GDP, yep.
That the GDP of the US is still very high, but man, a lot of people are in penury. It's
yep.
Yeah, it's and that's what's causing all of this problem anyway. So that makes sense. Okay, so let's come to this discussion for today, which is on this restructuring thing. You know, I started talking to and I'm putting that in context of all of these HENSAs and all of these things that we see. You know, I've asked myself the question. Okay, let's even assume that restructuring is supposed to happen. Okay, what shape? The first question that we need to ask ourselves is, what shape is it going to take? Is it supposed to be at a state level? Do you understand? Are we supposed to go back to the regional structure? Or are we supposed to be doing private property? Say, for example, in the US, do you understand? If somebody found oil on his land, it is his oil. Do you understand? So are we going to that level? Or is it something that people are assuming that we're going back to structural? Or to regions, or we're going at the state level? So this is one question. The second question is, when we talk about restructuring, are we talking only in terms of political restructuring and then every other thing will fall in line, or are we talking about other things? What's your take on that?
Okay, so the first one, shape. What shape should restructuring take?
Yes.
And the second one is, where does it start and where does it end? So it's boundary. But before I do that, I'll first ask, what's restructuring? What problem? Because the way we define restructuring is a solution. What exactly is the problem we want to solve?
Exactly, I agree with you. In fact, for the week one of this video, that's exactly what I'm addressing. What is the problem? So, but please go ahead.
Because before you prescribe a medicine or medication to an ailing child, you'd have to diagnose and say, what's the problem? For our country, Nigeria, we all agree that, we have an underperforming nation. Okay. I don't want to say a sick nation. We have an underperforming country. It's not met anybody's expectation. But can we place our hand and say, these and these are the things that are wrong? Because we know the symptoms. We have a huge population base for which we cannot cater for.
Okay.
Right. We're seeing a growing insecurity, problem with insecurity. We have an army of unemployed youths.
Correct.
We have a very expensive political system.
Correct.
So for me, those are symptoms. What's the problem? Fundamentally, as we ask ourselves, is the problem the fact that we have no aspiration and vision as a nation?
Okay.
Or we have aspiration and vision of where we want to go to, but we lack the means of getting there.
I think, okay, so in my view, right, I think it's an over-centralization issue. first. Do you understand? At least
Yep.
when I look at it, okay, let's take a common problem that we all know about, that we want to be able to solve, this police issue. Do you understand? I think that it's a bit irresponsible in this day and age for us to be assuming that policing in my hometown or in your hometown should be controlled from Abuja. Do you understand?
Yes. Yes.
Where else in the world? You look at the US, I mean, police levels are state limits. You look at the UK, there's a London Metropolitan Police. Who manages London? There's a Manchester Metropolitan Police. So, I mean, and every other serious countries around the world does that. You cannot have a population of 180 million, yeah, if you were to use the normal ratios of, say, 1 to 2,000 people, one policeman to 2,000 people, yeah, it means that we're talking that we should normally have about at least 100,000 police officers. Do you understand? Or what am I talking about? You should have about 10 million or something ridiculous like that, because that would be 180 divided by 2,000. Okay? So let's assume that you should have 1 million police officers, even for argument's sake. Now, it's difficult for you to have 1,000 police officers who are operating in different towns with different, do you understand, responsibility on a day-to-day basis, and you expect them to have a central command to manage that. It's just...
So I hear you, Kunle, and so the way I would liken our problem, I'll break it down to a vehicle. I'll break it down to a company. You're a company and you make chalk. Your product is a chalk. That's the vision. You want to be the best chalk making company. Your product is chalk. You have employees and you have everyone. But fundamentally, you need three things. You need operations, very good operations. You need a product, and you need management. Combining these things are three things. One is strategy. Strategy is the heart of everything, right?
Correct.
A strategy that ties your financial strategy with your marketing strategy, with your operational strategy, right? Because if there's a mislink between your financial strategy and your operational strategy, you will go out of business. And if there's a mislink between your financial strategy and your marketing strategy, you equally will go out of business. You will make great products, but you will not be able to market them. I see a problem as that of a strategy. We have not defined first the vision we want of in Nigeria. And we've not defined how we want to structure it. What kind of structure will take us to our vision? That structure can be decentralized, centralized, or midway in between, a mixed structure, depending on the outcome we desire.
That we want. It's a very interesting way of looking at it. I've not looked at it from that idea that actually maybe what we have not done yet is to define what we want first before we know the vehicle, because basically restructuring, like you're saying now, is a vehicle to get us to where we're going.
Yeah. If we want a very efficient federation, we want a federation where folks are held accountable and efficiency is the watchword, then a decentralized federation is what you need, where the federating unit becomes your smallest part, because that's where you can get accountability.
Correct.
That's where you can decide if things are efficiently done or not.
I see your point. But you see, the follow-up question, though, is the system that we have today. Do you understand? The system that we had today was set up to address some fundamental problems. So Correct. If you remember, if you look back at First Republic, we had a parliamentary system. The regions were very strong, very, very strong. And there was a feeling at that time that the prime minister, the prime minister was not strong enough to control the federating units if there was a problem, which is why we switched to this presidential system to give that president a more power, more say. But I don't know whether that has really worked out for us.
And it hasn't. It hasn't, because even then, I think the diagnosis of our problem was wrong. The diagnosis of our problem then pointed to the fact that our problem was control.
Okay.
Control of the federating unit. Yes, some of it was right because it was that of nationhood and statehood. We thought if we define nationhood and statehood the way we wanted to define it, and we put a centralized control, we will achieve it. But unfortunately, I think yes, nationhood and statehood was a big problem that we needed to solve. But there are different ways we should have solved it. Now, centralization just helped us thus far. And that's why every time we get into democracy, we have this challenge. It becomes very, very obvious because the centripetal force, democracy is about that centripetal force having its freedom.
Yeah.
Okay? And it's not a military rule. Once you get into democracy, it means the federating parts have freedom to ask questions and go in their way. Then it becomes obvious that you've not even built a nation state and there's no national identity. And the soul of the nation is pulled apart.
The other thing that I've seen, and actually sometimes I get pained that a lot of the people in the new generation don't have an opportunity to read some of these books. There's a very critical book written by Awo, My Thoughts on Nigerian Constitution. Do you understand? Now, and in that book, I remember that they were giving examples of countries that have similar problems to what we have. So, for example, in that book, he talked about the canton systems in Switzerland. Okay, you look at what we have in northern Cyprus, where Cyprus itself is a mix of Greeks and Turks. Do you understand? And how they are splitting power between those two groups of people. Or you go to Lebanon, where you have Christians, Masonites, Muslims, and the Constitution recommends how power is split between each of those two groups. Now, in each of those countries, to be honest, there's none of them that has been successful, except Switzerland. Switzerland has been doing very well. But in Switzerland, what has happened is that the power is basically on the side of the cantons, of the states, of those federating units, to the extent that each of those states even have the power for immigration. Do you understand? To say that, okay, if you come in, we can accept you as a citizen of our canton. It's not the country that takes that decision. You see what I mean? Whereas if you look at Lebanon on the other side, or you look at northern Cyprus, it's complete. Yes, it's been a complete waste. So for me, when you look at Nigeria, I see that there are fundamental issues. I personally, if you ask me, I thought the 19th state structure that we had at maybe 1979, 1980, the Second Republic, I think they worked, and I'll tell you why. I thought that the states were viable enough, they were large enough, so they were viable. There was a good mix of what was the responsibility of the states and what was the responsibility of the federal government. What has, however, happened, in my opinion, subsequently is that we have split the states so much more now. Do you understand? You have, and every time you create a state in the southwest, you have to create one in the southeast and one in the north. So now there are too many of them, and many of them are not viable. There are so many of those states who are not viable, and we need to ask ourselves whether we can continue to carry those states. I can't remember, I think it was when Buhari became president, somebody was saying that 22 states were owing salaries. Now, they were not making any money. When you look at the number of states who are able to meet their obligations, there are only about 8 or 9 of them. There are not too many of them. So maybe that's where the problem is, that we have so many of them who are not able to meet their responsibilities. What do you think about that?
I think that's part of the problem. I think, and it goes back to my very fundamental definition earlier. So I think where we are today, the first question we need to figure is which is your second question you posed earlier: how far and how, the boundaries. And I would say, I'll define it differently. What's our federating unit? Let power be devolved to the federating unit.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What's our federating unit? Let power go there. If our states are our federating unit, right? If the 36 governors are the people who come and sign and say the entity called Nigeria, we're part of it, And if we want to go out of it, we will take a referendum at this level.
Correct. At our federating level. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Once you figure out your federating unit, it means automatically that power resides there. So central will be residual powers they will give to the central.
To the central. I agree with you.
But the bulk of the powers will stay
with the federating unit. I mean, I'll come to that and I'll say two things. So for me now, to be honest with you, I'm not sure what our federating units are. Is it the local government or the state? I don't know. Do you understand? Then we talked about places like Switzerland, where this arrangement is working at the moment. And what you will see in those kind of places is that all the responsibility is at state level. The only thing at the federal is defense and foreign affairs.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. And you go to places like Canada, it's the same thing.
Exactly.
If you go to Canada, it's the same thing. They have a federal parliament, but the kind of powers the federal parliament have are minimal relative to the states.
The states, exactly. Who are the federating
or the federating unit?
No, but who is our federating unit? Is it states or local government in Nigeria now? What is it?
It's a painful one. So there is something overarching bigger than the states. We call it our tribe or our region.
Okay, I see. Okay.
No, but that's the truth, because if you look at it very well, you can't say Osun State will be a federating unit. Osun State cannot sign an agreement on behalf of Osun people.
Correct. Okay, but then, Elliot, it's a very big question that you just asked then. Are we then saying that if that's the case, if our current states are too small or they are not feasible, viable to be able to be federating units, are we then suggesting that maybe we are better off going back to that regional system? Is that?
I think so. I think to a large extent it's going to be at the regional level, because remember that. So there are two things that are wrong with us as in Nigeria. One is the federating unit thing. The second is the individual mindset thing. Now, if you see every state and people who contest power, every time you go, they never think about baking the cake. They never ask themselves, how are my programs going to be financed?
Okay.
They talk about program and they talk about allocation.
Allocations.
I sit and something come. Now, if you go to region as a federating unit, you will still have that mindset issue. You won't have solved it. Because it just means the regional government will bake the cake and share.
But then if we go to... Sorry, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
But the fundamental thing is a change in the mindset where nobody bakes the cake. The states and everybody will be baking the cake. It's no more sharing.
Correct.
That discussion will happen at the beginning of the year, that this year, this is our budget, this is how much we can make as a state.
And this is how you are going to fund it. 1 second. Sorry about that. Please go ahead.
Okay. So that discussion happens at the beginning of the year, which is, this is how much we have been able to bake. So this is how much we would share. This is our aspiration. Lagos State, for instance, we want every street in Lagos State to have lights. We want roads, and we want pipe-borne water at the minimum. So this is how much we have been able to generate. This is
what we're going to spend. And I agree with you. And you see, for me, actually, I completely agree with you 100%, because I think that this is where we got it wrong. This idea that people will allocate money to us has made us a bit lazy. I always say, if you look at each of those states, most of these states have something that they can depend on. Pick any state at random, whether it's Zamfara, who has gold, or you go to ask yourself, when was the last time anybody mined bauxite and aluminum in Jos or tin in Jos? Do you understand? Or when was the last time anybody sold coal from UD Hills in Enugu? Or do you understand? Bitumen has been in Ondo State since 1893. Do you understand? And in huge quantities. Do you understand? But nobody does anything about any of this because we are getting allocation.
We're waiting for allocation.
Correct.
We're waiting for allocation. We have a civil service we can't take care of. Let me give you another example. Who says education cannot give me so much money as to run a state?
Correct.
If I decide that I want to have schools and I want people to pay for those schools, good education. If you look back and you see how much we export to the United Kingdom or
Every
how much
year.
we export to the US, if I decide that my competitive advantage as state A is education and education and education, we send people to Ghana to school.
Correct.
Ghana, our neighbor.
Correct. I mean, you're right. I remember when I was in, one of the years I did my master's in the UK. I think basically, apart from China, Nigeria was the second largest contributor to that sector. And it's a huge sector. You know, it's a huge sector. These guys are paying, people are paying what? Foreign students in the UK are paying £16,000 per year now.
Per year.
So in the US, it's a lot worse.
A lot worse. If you look at it that way, there is enough opportunities, even without natural resources, for states to say, okay, you know, services. We can make good money. There is services. I will create a commercial center, and if you want to register a company, we can register it in Ogun State for 2 hours. We will compete with Abuja. You don't need to send anybody to Abuja. I have a hub to register a company. I have a hub for technology. So really, it is just simply that everybody, it's a mindset thing. Everybody waits for the top down.
Okay, I ask you one last contentious one, because one of the things that will happen then is that if you're saying that we should go to state or regional levels, some people will feel disadvantaged, won't they? Say, for example, what do you come back to this so-called onshore, offshore dichotomy. Say, for example, does that put a state like Rivers State or Bayelsa at an advantage over a Kebbi or Zamfara? What do you do with offshore fields? As an example, just as an example.
Yeah, there are things that are going to be contentious, but if people have the will, they will have the might.
Correct.
Remember when the Soviet Union was balkanized and they had the United States of, they are United States.
Commonwealth of Independent States, you're right.
Yeah. Remember, before then, it used to be the Soviet Union, and the governors sat back one day. It was supposed to be a meeting for them to rectify perestroika, right? Glasnost and perestroika.
Correct.
They had the coup against Gorbachev, and that day communism went down, and they signed off that they had the independent state.
Correct.
Now, in that same agreement, because what they did was they went from a unitary state to what? A federal system.
Correct.
With a stroke of a pen.
Correct.
Right? And they created a transition period. And they also created monies or loans for some states that were worse off, that were going to be hit bad.
I see.
Somebody had to underwrite those checks.
I see your point. Actually, you're right, because I believe the similar thing happened also for Yugoslavia, actually.
Yugoslavia,
yes. The same thing happened in
Yugoslavia. After fighting the war, they realized that they needed to go to their way, and they had painful consequence. Now, the onshore, offshore dichotomy will remain, but it's for the courts now to adjudicate and say, do we still have federal waters and littoral states? If we do, then things that belong to federal waters are federal.
Correct.
And from that point.
And by the way, you're right. I just wanted to get your own feed on it, because you're absolutely right. You have the same scenario in the US. Say, for example, a state like Louisiana or Texas. There's a boundary of Texas, of the waters of Texas, which is 3 miles offshore, versus what constitutes U.S. coastal waters. You understand? So those things can still be adjudicated, like you said, and so it looks like this is feasible, actually. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your contribution on this. I'm really happy with it. All right.
Thank you, Mr.